So you find in the bilateral, what you call the Paris Club debt, the bilateral ones, you'll find them on the budget. You'll find line items. For example, USAID is funding a bridge in Lamu, for example, or British aid is funding something in education, or there is a road being built by the Italians, and it's on the budget. It is always in what you call the appropriations bill. The appropriations bill is basically the budget according to our laws. Now, you'll find that. You'll find there is support for IMF and World Bank in the budget. It is there. Some budget is support going to line items, what are called vote items in the budget. Some of this IMF money I'll come to later, we are questioning what it's about because it is not in the budget. Now, you come to what you call this new pocket that was introduced over the last 10 years or so, called the London Club pocket. Kibaki took a small portion of it as he was exiting, but it was really perpetuated under this regime of Ruto. That pocket of London Club is very expensive commercial money, more or less commercial money. It comes from private investors. Eurobond comes from private investors looking for where they can put their money, right, and earn a good interest rate. So the interest rate was taken for our first Eurobond of 2 billion was about 6 or 7%, but it has gone up. Now, Eurobonds that the Ruto government took was 7 billion. They've also taken a similar amount under syndicated loans, 7 billion. And I can tell you today that none of that money, because it is long-term, it is beyond 1 year, none of that money, you're talking about $15 billion, appears anywhere in our budget. It funds not one project. It does not even, we don't even have it as appearing in the consolidated fund. It does not fund one item on the budget. That is your London Club pocket, and it is very expensive. Then you have the Chinese debt. The Chinese debt, most of it is anchored in our budget. It is very clearly stipulated what projects they're supporting. Right? If we are doing a road, if we are doing SGR, it has been there. But SGR has been a fraud of monumental proportions. And I'll simply put it this way, just to give you an example. Just to give you an example. I'm very familiar with this project called SGR. Very familiar. I initiated that project under the Kibaki regime. In fact, it was under the coalition agreement of Kibaki and Raila. We started that project in 2008, and that project was simply a private project. It had no government money. We wanted to do a private feasibility study because a company called RVR had failed. And we wanted to do private investment of a line from Mombasa all the way to Malaba. Right? Simply a private investment, no taxpayers' money. Our costing out of our feasibility study and our technical study came to 55 billion shillings. All the way from Mombasa to Malaba. I suddenly saw an amount of just Mombasa to Nairobi, somebody parachuting object that had become government under the Ruto government of 380 billion. Just Mombasa to Nairobi. That project from Mombasa to Naivasha costed for what were called the original construction plus rolling stock amounted to 500 billion shillings. So just to give you a summary. So the cost of the project is 500 billion. Chinese Exim Bank, that's the Chinese debt, say we are going to loan the Kenya government a total of 90% of that money. So Kenyans, you must raise 10%. 10% of 500 is 50 billion shillings. So us from our hard-earned taxes must pay 10% before they pay the 90%. So we did an audit of these amounts. It's part of our debt audit. We did an audit. What happened? Did the Chinese give us all the money that they said. Yes, they did. They gave all the money. It was paid directly to China Road and Bridge Company, the 90%. So did Kenyans raise the 50 billion, which was 10% of 500, right? And did they contribute their share of 10%? We did the sums. Now, on the loan part, I want you to remember we are servicing that loan at very expensive rates. In fact, this coming month, there's a big bill coming up. Now, did we raise the 50 billion to as our contribution of 10%? So we did the numbers, right? And it's called Self-Raising Finance, SGR grant from the Treasury. So 50 billion was supposed to move from Treasury to Kenya Railways and then to the contractor called China Road and Bridge. So we just did the math. Eric, it was not 50 billion that was paid. It was 644 billion shillings that came out of the Treasury to go to Kenya Railways, to then go to China Road and Bridge as self-raising finance for a project worth 500 billion. So we paid for it with our own money and even more. And yet we took a loan and we are paying back that loan. The of SGR from Mombasa to Naivasha was paid a total of almost 1.2 trillion for a project of 500 billion, according to the contract documents. So 700 billion above what was required. That is a frightening fact. Then you come to something called domestic debt. What you hear, bonds and bills taken from our local banks, insurance companies, pension funds. This amount of the total debt we're talking about, almost 11 trillion, today stands at 5.1 trillion. 800 from our pension funds, 700 from insurance companies, the rest from banks. In other words, it's our deposits, the Kenyans' deposit in our banks, that the banks have decided to take to the Treasury, loan to the Treasury, and then our taxes pay them their huge interest rates. So you can see where you see some bank CEOs earning humongous amounts of bonuses and all sorts of amounts like 300-400 million shillings a year. This is why our money going to our government and our taxes paying for all these banks to make humongous profits at our expense. You and I try and borrow, we are told to borrow at 25%. They are loaning to the government at 16%. It is a monumental fraud because, again, there is nowhere in our appropriations bills, revenue, that you can say, this money, look at bonds. The other day they took an infrastructure bond of 200 and something billion shillings. I think it was February. What infrastructure on the budget was being funded? Nothing. Nothing. These bonds and bills have funded nothing in our budget. And yet, do you know how much interest we have paid for 5.1 trillion over 10 years? We have paid them a total of 2.7 trillion in interest payments. This is criminality beyond your imagination. And there are some key banks here that have perpetuated this fraud. KCB, Cooperative Bank, Equity Bank. Those are three banks that have perpetuated a very clear fraud on the Kenyan public, us as depositors, and us as taxpayers, and made humongous profits, become oligarchs against the sovereign, against us. And we must start saying we are not going to take this rubbish anymore. And this rubbish goes this way. If you have deposits in those banks, if your parents have deposits in those banks, we should pull them out tomorrow, not today, not yesterday, not the day after, tomorrow, if not today. Remove that money. Take it to banks that are not defrauding us, because what is happening there is a fraud of the highest proportions. I want to go back to the London Club debts. these bonds, Eurobonds, these syndicated bonds, these syndicated loans, none of those appear on the budget. But one underlying fact you will find is that somewhere along the way, like you saw recently with the latest payments of Eurobond, the last payment of Eurobond was paid 500 so-called billion balance, right, of the 2 billion we had borrowed. That was paid by World Bank, IMF. Why are they underwriting money that never came to us? Who is this that they are backing? So here they are. They encourage us to take those very expensive loans, knowing full well they are not on a budget. And then when we can't pay, IMF comes up and it starts rattling. Oh, we can save you, but these are the conditions. And the conditions become a matter they become a matter of our slavery. Now, all this information I'm giving is in the public domain. Our forensic audit is in the public domain. We got it from public documents. We are not trying to create new documentation. And we've been speaking this for the last 2 years. Kenyans need to understand categorically that we are in a mode of slavery. And I'll perpetuate this slavery by going back to the point where we were saying today, 80% of our tax revenue is going to one item called debt. These debts I'm talking about, and which we have already paid for, don't owe, but we are going to keep being made to pay unless we cut off this chain because it is illegal. We do not owe it. This coming financial year, 2024-2025, the estimate from the Treasury of debt payments, keeping the current exchange rate, is 1.853164. In other words, 1.853 trillion shillings is going towards the debt payments this financial year of 2024-2025. You come to the year 2025-2026, it is 2.2 trillion to be paid to debt payments. You go to the next year, 2026-2027, is 2.352. And remember, we are getting what you call diminishing returns on our revenue, the Laffer curve, which is the maximum you can squeeze out of us. There is no item in our budget that is taking so much money. People are complaining about confidential funds of 700 million shillings. Look at this year. You tell me which item is taking over 1.8 trillion, one single item in debt payments, in any payment. Nothing is doing that. Nothing at all. This is the tragedy that we are living in. We are in slavery. And we are in such slavery that William Ruto is soon going to come and tell us that he can no longer pay it. And that we have been unable to pay it because, you people rejected the finance bill. Now I cannot raise revenue. So now I have to default on this payment. And the default means that they now start coming to your accounts. They start looking for your deposits. And they start telling you that you've got to take a share of this. Otherwise, the banks will close. And we're going to have serious problems here. Ghana went through this. And Ghana are suffering today. They are suffering from 2022 December, where 70%, 70 shillings of every 100 went to debt. They are suffering. And I can tell you, it is so tragic because you go back to the London Club debts. You go back to these so-called Mzungu's guy that he's talking about. These criminals that have perpetuated this fraud even in places like Malaysia and gotten caught. These big firms called JP Morgan Chase, they have been part of a conspiracy because if you are going to loan anybody money, the first thing you must do is your due diligence. What are you giving this money for? Is it in line with the laws of Kenya? Which project is being funded? The Eurobond that was taken in 2013. Our investigation is very clear on this. It started an investigation all the way back in 2014. When I can tell you here on this show, a man called Jacob Juma, the late, he was my friend, came to visit me. And he tells me, Jimmy, I can tell you there's something fishy going on here. And you know all he had? He was just simply reading what are called the National Treasury quarterly reports. That is all. And he said, the president stood up when he said he's taking the Eurobond. And he said, because he's taking the Eurobond, they are not going to borrow domestically. The estimate at the time was about 300 billion shillings. So 3 billion almost euro, a Eurobond that he was taking. But when I look at the quarterly reports from the National Treasury, it seems they still borrow domestically from the local banks. And that's their quarterly report, not the budget, quarterly report. And they are not recording what happened to the Eurobond. So we started asking some questions. Unfortunately, we got the opposition leader, Raila Amolo Odinga at the time, to write a letter to the Treasury to ask, where are these Eurobonds? The 2 billion you say you borrowed, what has happened to it? On a bit of a scare for the then Minister of Finance called Rotich, he released documentation. And he showed the following, that $1 billion, they went out into the market and they managed to get $2 billion early 2014. In fact, by May 2014. And that $2 billion, they showed us what is called the expenditure pattern of those dollars. So they said, one of the first 1 billion, $650 million of that money went to pay a syndicated loan of Mwai Kibaki directly to a bank called Barclays Bank. In fact, Standard Chartered, sorry. And they showed us a SWIFT transfer of that amount. Then a SWIFT transfer is to show, like you get an RTGS that shows from point A to point B, it went to the account and was credited. Then they showed us that 350 balance of that first $1 billion, it went directly to the consolidated fund, exchequer account 00010,03987. And they showed us very clearly that account. 350 credited. We said, hallelujah, asante sana. Very good work. Then we said, where is the second one? They said, oh, the second one, we hung on to until September of that year. We don't know why they asked JP Morgan Chase to hang on to that. But they said it also came. We said, show us, like you showed us of the 350, show us this amount of 1 billion, how it came to the Treasury. Said, because the 350 that came to the Treasury, came to the central bank, account number 1, it showed categorically that you had a SWIFT transfer. You even had your letters from CBK addressed to the Treasury, showing the exchange rate confirmation that you transferred to Kenya shillings. Show us the same for this $1 billion in September. They sent and put up a SWIFT transfer. But that SWIFT transfer did not show us where that money went. It was completely blackened out. Apart from the top, where you see it leaving an account at JP Morgan Chase, the rest was completely blackened out. Then they tried to quickly show us an amount in December that was directly from Citibank, what they called tap sales of $815 billion. Right? That $815 billion, they showed us the SWIFT transfer. It came to an account they had now created in the central bank called a sovereign wealth account, some 10,12674 account, not the consolidated fund. We said, And then they showed us the communication from the same central bank saying we have credited this amount with an exchange rate of this value. We said, very good. Can you go back to the one of September? Where is it? They never, ever showed us. We eventually saw it in the Auditor General's special audit of the Eurobond, done by Edward Auko. And Edward Auko, in his report, says that this amount entered an account called 8,214 something. We said, what account is this? We don't know it. We don't know it at all. What is this account? We never got a further explanation. But nobody dared to present even one iota of that SWIFT transfer like they had done for the others. Even the letter exchanging the amount from dollars to Kenya shillings, central bank saying this is the exchange value amount, they didn't show us. What we know is that that money, nobody has provided evidence that it entered this country. Now, the Auditor General in his report further goes to say that all these amounts cannot be attached to not even one project. And actually, even in his conclusion, says that when he asked the Treasury, what were these monies so-called used for? The Treasury says that these man's funds are fungible. In other words, they're interchangeable. They can do what they want with them. In other words, they admitted they are breaking the law. That is just one Eurobond of $2 billion. One did not come here. They subsequently took another 5. Please take note. They subsequently took another 7 in syndicated loans. We cannot find anywhere in our budget and in our books. Now, Kenyans, are we going to continually accept that we are going to become slaves and have agreed to become slaves, because this is what is called modern day slavery now and for generations to come, the perpetuating our poverty and our slavery? In the old days, slavery was something that was done with chains put to our hands and our feet. That is what is happening here with this debt. Debt has now been used by our own oligarchs, our own people in power, and of course, in collaboration with others outside this land. Others outside this land who know what is going on, who know the illegalities of what has been perpetuated, to ensure that we are slaves to them in perpetuity. You can complain about the finance bill today or tomorrow, which are tax-raising measures. But we are going down so fast as a nation. The poverty rates are increasing by the day because of one item. Anything that is collected from us is going to others, and it never came to our use. And it's going in such large amounts. It is strangling us. It is finishing us for generations to come. And my proposal has been very clear. What is not in our laws, what does not exist in our constitution, is not liable to the sovereign. We are not and should not pay it. We must cut this chain off our neck. We must remove it. And those who put us in this mess must pay the ultimate price of justice for the people of Kenya, because they have caused havoc to our lives. We have said continually that this regime will not change it, because it was part and parcel of doing what we are suffering. They are not going to hang themselves. So William Ruto should not pretend that he can set up a task force to come and whitewash what he knows he is capable to. He is not going to tell us that we will not accept. This is a fraud of monumental proportions. We are unlike other countries that have had to shut down because of debt. Ours, we do not have. And I can tell you, with all the sums we have paid, my fellow Kenyans, we do not owe any debt to anybody. We do not. In fact, if we remove that debt from our books, I can tell you have a reduction of taxation, and you'll have money in your pockets like you've never seen before. But people are hostage to their own creations. And we must reach a stage now where we say we are going to cut off. We are not going to be anybody's slaves. And we must cut this link. And those who are perpetuating it must face justice. And those foreigners who have been part of this, who have been perpetuating this, who know what they are doing to our demise as a country, we will also follow you. We will look for you. You are criminals. You have aided criminality. In Malaysia, you were found. In Mozambique, you were found. You shall be found even in Kenya. And those who are protecting them, please. We used to have big friends. The West have been good friends of Kenya in the past. Why do you want us to be your slaves? We are just as good, if not better than you. We deserve more, and we are not going to take this nonsense anymore. So my fellow Kenyans, we start with our own. Those who are perpetuating our slavery in something called domestic debt, those culprits, those oligarchs, must be dealt with now. Tomorrow, the day after that, go take your money from those banks. Tell them they are not at liberty to continue your slavery. Tell those banks that decide they are going to put money in bonds and bills to our detriment, bonds and bills, money that does not enter the consolidated fund, money that is going to buy bullets to kill our children, that we cannot account for. We are not going to agree anymore. Stop them and tell them that you are going to go and greet them if they perpetuate this mentality. But now that they have done it and they have sunk us, take your money back. Tell them you are going to put to entering of SGR
ya
from
huyo
Mombasa
amekuwa ni
to
Jimmy
Naivasha
Wanjigi
was paid a
akizungumzia mambo
total of
tu ya
almost 1.2
madeni
trillion
ya
for
Kenya,
a
ambayo
project
anasema
of
kwamba
500 billion
hayo
according to the
madeni
contract
si
documents.
ya kweli, ni
So
madeni ya
700 billion
kuwekelewa. So
above
sijui
what
una maoni
was
gani
required.
kuhusiana na yale yote
That
ambayo Jimmy Wanjigi
is
ameweza
a frightening,
kuzungumzia kwenye hiyo haudi ambayo umetoka
fact.
kuyasikia sasa hivi.
Then
Kama uko
you
na
come to
maoni
something
niachie hapo
called domestic debt.
kwenye comment section.
What
Nashukuru
you
sana
hear
kwa
bonds
kuchagua
and
Wasource TV. Kama uko
bills
na maoni tofauti
taken
niachie
from
hapo kwenye
our
comment
local
section. Kama huja
banks,
subscribe na
insurance
kuomba uweze
companies,
kusubscribe
pension
kwenye
funds.
Wasource TV. Mimi niite Manoti
This amount of
ndani
the
ya
total debt
Wasource
we're talking
TV.
about,
Hadi
almost
wakati
11
mwingine
trillion.
na kutakia
Today
mchana
stands at
mwema. Asante
5.1
sana kwa
trillion.
kutazama Wasource TV.
800